let's move to character power rankings here. I think.
Do we get like a cool like Fox Sports graphic?
I want the Fox football robots just sort of dancing across
colored
the screen.
in like Star Trek colors. It transforms into the NX-01. That'd be cool.
Let's do character rankings
for that, right?
Character rankings for the first season. Do you want to start from the top or do you want to start from the bottom? Which one do you think is easier? The worst character or the best character?
I think it's probably easier to start from the bottom.
All right. So the best we'll start crossing them out.
Yeah, because it's like, unfortunately, I think like there's a clear best, but then everybody else is fighting. The top two are gold and silver are pretty clear, but everybody else is fighting for bronze. Let's
start with the worst then. Mm-hmm. Do you want to go first? We can kind of alternate, or we can just hash this out as we go. For me, it's between Mayweather and Reed. Those are the two contenders for the worst spots. And I don't know if you have a feeling one way or the other.
I would agree. I think this may sound strange. I think I'm going to go with Reed because they haven't given enough play to Mayweather. He's almost a recurring guest star at this point.
He's almost a very effective background character.
Yeah, like in TNG, what was it? I guess it would be like was it like O'Brien, who just like popped up in a couple episodes and you didn't really learn anything about it. I mean, you'd learn more about it eventually, but like
I'd say more like Ro Laren would be a good example.
Yeah. But yeah, he's there. They dropped the ball with not making him the time cop guy, which would have made him instantly more interesting. But yeah, like, even I think the best depiction or the most illustrative depiction of what they think about Mayweather is the Ryza episode where he disappears for half the episode. Then he breaks his leg and spends the rest of the time in sickbay worrying about getting going into anaphylactic shock.
Yeah, right.
That's like the high point of his season.
Yeah.
And it's not, and that doesn't mean the rest of it's bad. He's just not really around. He doesn't really do much. Reed, on the other hand, is around a lot.
Yes.
And doesn't really have much interesting about him.
That would be my argument. I'd also put Reed below, even though I think Mayweather, if we were to argue this at the end of the series and say like which character was the least utilized, it would probably be Mayweather because Reed does feel like he has things to do. I think that Mayweather's personality and appearances have all been very consistent, where I don't think that they know what Reed is. I think Reed is different depending on who writes him. Sometimes he comes across as very like a security officer. Some of the people write him as kind of like an engineer almost. Like he doesn't, and his like posh aristocratic British background doesn't seem like it's befitting what the character is supposed to be, which is like, I picture him as kind of like a hawkish, like you were saying, like a hawkish military man I would cast him older than he is here. I'd cast him as like a 50 or 60-year-old man. Yeah.
I would make him older than Archer.
Yeah.
Someone who I've mentioned this as a reference point before, but someone like Idris Elba's character in Star Trek Beyond, who is old enough to remember what things were before the Federation. Mm-hmm. So you have that contrast of guy who wants to do things the old way versus the captain who's about pushing everything forward.
So we'll go from the bottom, Reed, then Mayweather. Our next up, I think it's between Hoshi and Trip, maybe. You might disagree. I think Hoshi is clearly the person who sits there.
I think so too.
Yeah. I think that one's easy enough. There's not much to say about Hoshi. I felt like Hoshi was going to be a character, but she's repeated her nervousness tick for the entire season. And that's really all that you had. So I would argue she's a improved version of Mayweather where she has something going for her, but it's only slightly more developed than what Mayweather ends up doing.
Yeah, she at least can be defined by her job if you need to. Whereas Mayweather, you can't really even define him by his job. Yeah, he's just sort of defined by what generation he was born into, I guess.
Yeah. The boomer thing.
Yeah. Trip is interesting because
do you even it might not be Trip. So who we've got left are Archer, T'Pol, Trip, and Phlox.
I think it's got to be Trip because I think the only thing really elevating Trip at this point is the performance. Because the guy who plays him is pretty good and is pretty charismatic. But if you take that away, I feel like Trip is a fairly forgettable character.
Yeah, he's a better cast version of Reed, I think, really.
Yeah.
Like the performance is carrying the character, even though, as we've complained about, like the fact that he's best friends with Archer never really comes across in any effective way. The fact that like his sort of Southern charm occasionally comes across and things like Unexpected, I think that he kind of plays that well. But he is just he's another one who's the engineer. But you don't really think of him as the engineer. He touches the engines a lot, but it doesn't seem that way. I would put him there as well. So it would be Reed, Mayweather, Hoshi, and then Trip in that spot after that. So the remaining people are Phlox, T'Pol, and Archer.
I think I'm going to go in that order reversed. So I think I would go Archer, T'Pol, and Phlox are my 3, 2, and 1.
Archer, T'Pol, and then Phlox. Yeah. Would I disagree with that? No, I don't think I'd disagree with that. T'Pol's funny because T'Pol is, I would argue T'Pol is actually poorly written for a lot of the season. She's high up there because I think they eventually settle on, and just in terms of her character, if she didn't exist in this show, I don't know what you have for a cast. Like if there was no Vulcan character, I don't really know, because even Phlox is basically a happy-go-lucky human. You know, like he could be a human who just has that kind of attitude. There's nothing like cultural about him that keeps him separate, but he's unique because he's very happy compared to everyone else, which they're playing as kind of a denobulin trait or whatever. Yeah. I would agree with you that it's Archer. Archer's the weakest captain, so he's the third in that trifecta. Bakula's fine. I still think Bakula is miscast, or they miswrote this character as to what he is. And then Phlox is the best character because he has the best episode in the season dedicated to himself. He is an interesting character. He's well performed. He's funny in the things that he needs to be funny in, and he can also be serious in things. And I feel like he's the most consistent. There's never been a time where I'm like, I don't know what Phlox is doing here. This doesn't make any sense for him, where I think I could say that for all the other characters on the show at this point.
I do wonder if it's a little unfair to put him in the top just because he's sort of got the best supporting actor kind of role, where he's doing a lot with the little amount that he's given. Like that he's not present as often as Archer and T'Pol are. So I don't know if maybe like, I mean, he's either well written and performed or he's not, I guess, and he is both of those things. But I wonder if it's unfair because his screen time is a lot less than Archer and T'Pol, so maybe it just seems like he's better than he is. But I would say that he's clearly a more thought out character, and whether or not that's from the page or informed by the performance, I'm not sure. But
I think it's script, because he's the one that fits your thing about. He's the only one I feel that you can really describe outside of their job in a lot of ways as to what their personality is, because his outlook on life is totally divorced from him being a doctor. He's the opposite of Bones, right? He's not the cynic that McCoy is. So that trait is not related to him being a doctor, really. Like his traits of being like, oh, I'm just kind of happy-go-lucky and I like to like observe other cultures and see what's going on. He's the most optimistic of the explorers that are going out there. And I think that works for him. I can't say that about anyone else. Like even Archer, I feel, suffers the most. If you can't define what Archer's outlook on this mission is, then I think that the show is in real trouble, because everything is seen through the captain's eyes. And I don't know if you can say that about Archer.
Do they explain why they know they are cool with the denobulins to the point where they have one on the ship? Because it seems at the beginning of this show like it's the Vulcans and then they just meet the Klingons, and they don't really have a lot of interplanetary friends at this point.
He was in some kind of medical exchange, I think, right? So they have some kind of limited alien interaction.
Yeah, I guess they have been in contact with other alien races for about 100 years at this point. So yeah, it makes sense. Okay.
Yeah, if they're talking to the Vulcans, I guess something would be there, but it's still rare because they're the only two on the the only two aliens are two of the main cast members on the entire ship. Mm-hmm. So it's still very limited in who's out there. Like, and T'Pol was forced on them. And Archer chose Phlox just because Phlox showed up in the first episode. That's the only reason he took him as a doctor, is because he was the one that actually came when he was summoned.
Nice.
So that's it. Yeah, it would be from the bottom. Character power rankings are Reed, Mayweather, Hoshi, Trip, Archer, T'Pol, Phlox. I'd agree with that. Yeah, that's my consensus as well.